Well, it looks like most of you came back, which is a good sign. Um, so this afternoon, or this next hour and a half, we're going to look at what happens behind the scenes in GENI when you run an experiment. And why do you need to know this? Well, often it's helpful to know, have some idea what's going on, what the tools are doing. It helps you debug your experiments. And we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of things, but at least a kind of an overview of what's going on. So in part one, just to review what we did in part one, you learned how to log into the GENI portal. You learned how to create a slice. You launched the FLAC experimenter tool. And then you ran a simple experiment. And you got resources from aggregates, in your case, from one aggregate. And then you used the resources. And then when you were done, you deleted these resources in your slice. I hope you all deleted resources in your slice. If you didn't, now would be a good time to do it. So what happened? And to understand what's happening behind the scenes, there are a couple new concepts that I will go over. There's the concept of the RSpecs. You probably heard some of that in the intro talk this morning. And then there's the concept of the GENI Aggregate Manager API. So we'll review these concepts and then actually look at these. We'll look at RSpecs, we'll modify an RSpec, we'll use the AM API directly. So an RSpec is essentially a resource specification. It's an XML document that describes resources. So resources could be virtual machines, raw PCs, could be links, switches. So these are all resources. An RSpec, like any XML, is pretty ugly, hard to read. But fortunately, most of the time, you would not have to read or write RSpecs. It's handy, though, to know, to look for certain fields in RSpecs if you're doing something a little more advanced. So a lot of setting up an experiment in GENI is about negotiating resources, finding out what resources are available, asking for resources, finding information about resources you got. And all that happens through these exchange of RSpecs between you, the experimenter, and the aggregate, the person the organization providing you the resource. And fortunately, again, you have tools such as FLAC to do to carry on this dialogue for you. In fact, you did it before lunch without having to look at RSpecs. So the tools do that for you. But there are three kinds of RSpecs that are advertisement RSpecs. So this is what is used by aggregates to advertise the resources. They'll tell an advertisement RSpecs might say, at this aggregate, we have 5 raw PCs, we have 500 virtual machines, we have these kinds of switches. So all the resources available to you from that aggregate are advertised using an advertisement RSpec. So it's an XML document that you can ask for, you get. And then you probably want a subset of those resources. And so from the advertisement, you can construct a request RSpec. The request says, I want 3 virtual machines running Ubuntu 12 connected in the certain topology. So that forms your request RSpec. And then you send the request RSpec to the aggregate. And if the resources are still available, it'll allocate those resources, provision them for you, as in load up the operating systems, install your public keys, and then it'll send you back a manifest RSpec. The manifest will have all the information you need to use the resource. It'll have IP addresses, MAC addresses, login information, anything you might need to use the resource. Okay? And so once you have the manifest, you can then use the resource. So 3 kinds of RSpecs. Just to recap, here's an experimenter. She says, what do I have? Essentially gets back an advertisement. She does a create sliver, which means essentially create these resources for me with a request RSpec. She gets back a manifest, which has the information she needs. And she can always give her slice name and ask again for what resources she has, and she'll get back a manifest. So just to understand how all this worked before lunch, the exercise you did, what happened was when you loaded up FLAC, remember it took a long time as it talked to every aggregate. What FLAC was doing was it has a list of aggregates. It was talking to each one of them, asking about your advertisement, asking for an advertisement RSpec. So it did list resources on each aggregate saying, tell me the resources you have. And based on the answer it got back, it populated this, if I can find my mouse. Yeah. It started populating this little palette here. So this aggregate said, oh, I have raw PCs and virtual machines. This aggregate, on the other hand, said, I have virtual machines, no raw PCs. So FLAC is getting back an advertisement RSpec from every aggregate, parsing it, and creating this palette for you from where you can drag and drop resources. And then what you did, when you drew this topology, FLAC was, when you grabbed a VM from here, FLAC behind the scenes started creating a XML document describing these resources. So it created an XML document for you that had a resource called server, because that's the name you gave it, and another, it added to the document another resource for another VM, connected them with a link. And it's not actually submitting the RSpec, it's just creating one for you. When you hit the submit button, FLAC ships the RSpec onto the aggregate. So it shipped the RSpec to the aggregate. Now it takes a while, as you know, to configure a computer, boot it, and FLAC periodically behind the scenes was making a sliver status. It was checking on the status of your request, asking the aggregate, is it ready yet? Is it ready yet? And the aggregate would say things like, oh, I've done allocating, in which case the FLAC would turn its canvas yellow. And when the aggregate finally says, ah, they're provisioned, that means they're ready to use, FLAC turns its canvas green. Okay, so that's all again happening behind the scenes. They're just exchanging XML documents, the FLAC and the aggregate. So after all the resources have been provisioned and ready to use, FLAC turns the canvas green, and you are then able to SSH. Now, if you recall, there was a little button that you could press, especially if you're a Unix user or a Mac user, where it had the SSH information. Well, where did that come from? FLAC parsed the manifest RSpec, which had information about which port number you should use to log in, what host name you should use. All that came in the manifest, and that's how FLAC knew to populate the information on its screens and let you log in and do things like that. So let's see. So as I already said, it has port numbers and so on. We did this, and then when you were done, when you press delete, FLAC essentially made the call called delete sliver to delete all the resources at that aggregate. So that's pretty much what happened behind the scenes when you did the last experiment exercise. Any questions? Okay. So what we're going to do now, just to reinforce these concepts, is we're going to actually view RSpecs, see what they look like. We're not going to read every line of an RSpec, but look for certain key or important elements of the RSpec. It's an XML document. And then we'll make instead of FLAC doing the work for us, we are going to do it ourselves. We are going to make the call that says create sliver or list resources. We're going to do that ourselves, just to get a feel for what this API is like. These are essentially web services. The aggregate manager you're making the call on is a web service. It's so you're using XML RPC. There is a tool called Omni that we will use. Essentially, all that does for you is makes the XML RPC calls for you. So it's putting the necessary wrappers and creating the managing the SSL certs. So you don't have to worry about the really low level XML RPC details. You can just focus on making the API calls. I assume everybody here has installed the Omni tools on your machine. Very good. So that's what we will use. So we'll do an experiment very similar to what we did before lunch, except we will use Omni. We could write the RSpec by hand, the XML document, but that would be extremely error prone and tedious. So we're going to use FLAC just to generate the RSpec. And we're not going to have FLAC do anything like submit the request or anything. We're going to do that ourselves. So we're going to tell FLAC to generate the RSpec. We're going to ask Flag to give us the RSpec, essentially export it from Flag, and then we can look at the RSpec, we can submit it ourselves and get resources. So the aggregate manager API, so this is every aggregate in GENI has to support this API. So it's an API that for listing resources, for asking for resources, create sliver, for checking on the status of resources. So to be a GENI aggregate, it has to support this API. So every GENI rack supports this API. Existing testbeds such as EmuLab, PlanetLab support this API. And so the API calls we'll be using are essentially create sliver. We could do list resources if you want. You'll get a big long XML. I don't think we'll do that. Create sliver to actually request resources. You have to send the RSpec. Sliver status to check on whether your resource is ready, and delete sliver to delete the resources. So the tool, as I said, is Omni, which is a command line tool. So you'll be running Omni from inside your terminal, either a Windows terminal or a Linux or Mac terminal. And it's written in Python. It's you can download it, look at the code if you want. It's all open source, and it works with all the GENI aggregates. And this is what commands look like. So this slide is slightly updated. You don't type .py. You just type Omni -a, the name of the aggregate you want to talk to, and the command. Okay. So do not type the .py, because everybody here is using a binary version of Omni, not the Python you're using, unless you're running Linux. If you're running Linux, you might be using the Python scripts, but everybody else is using binaries, so you don't have the .py. And there's a useful utility that comes with Omni called ready to login. And what this does is not only checks the status of your resource to see if it's ready to use, but it also prints out the SSH command you need to use to log in. So it actually parses the manifest and says, you need to log into this host at this port number. I know your username, so this is the SSH command, which you can just cut and paste into a terminal. So it's really handy. And it's a good way to check on the status of your resource. So that's what we will use. And Omni is making SSL calls. So I want to make sure we all understand the difference between SSH and SSL. So SSH is private public key pairs that you use to do things like logins, which we did this morning. SSL is secure socket layer, and these are certificates that are used to authenticate the endpoints in a XML RPC. Okay? All XML RPC in GENI, in the GENI infrastructure uses secure sockets, and so you need to have a client-side cert and a server-side cert. Again, the portal can generate these certs for you and configure Omni so it's in the proper places. Okay? You can do it manually, but it's again painful, error-prone. So recommend using the portal and a tool called Omni Configure to configure the portal. The other thing that Omni does for you is when you're using web services like GENI aggregate managers, you refer to the web server using a big long URL. Again, you don't want to be typing big long URLs. They're error-prone, tedious. So Omni has this notion of nicknames. So you can have short names essentially, or aliases. So you don't have to type this name. So for every GENI aggregate, Omni has a nicknames file. So for example, this long URL is referencing the InstaGENI rack at BBN, the GENI project office at BBN. The short name is IG-BBN. So if you're talking to the rack at Clemson, I think it's BBN-IG or IG-BBN both work. I think the new convention is name of the institution dash type of rack, IG or EG. So you'll say Clemson-IG. So your worksheet will tell you what rack to use and the nickname, the short name for the rack. So to configure Omni, there is a tool called Omni Configure. That's what we're going to start with since we're going to be using Omni. The first thing we're going to do is configure Omni. So I am going to let you do it on your own, and I will walk around. I just want to make sure all of you have a copy of the instructions that are, is this pink? I guess it's pink. Pink instructions. And there should be a worksheet that goes with it that is called Worksheet for Understanding the AM API. It's got the same picture that you had last time, except it's on top of the page now, of the worksheet. So anybody missing worksheet or instructions? What are you missing? You need both. I'm sorry? Oh, you went there in the previous session. Okay. So there's some extra stuff you need to do to configure your tools. Okay. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Okay, all right, good, good. Okay, so since I think everybody else was here in part one, so we do not need to do, you can start straight with step 2.2. So 2.1 was established, setting up your SSH keys. You did that before lunch. So we're going to go to part 2. I'm going to do it up here, but you can just do it in your worksheet, follow your worksheets. So you're going to log into the portal. If you're not already logged in, select Profile on top, and then go to Configure Omni. And then you need to, there are 4 steps there. You need, we'll just do the first 3. First is generate an SSL cert. So you have 2 options. Pick the simple option. It's the safest option. Essentially what it's doing is you're saying, you create the SSL certs for me as opposed to I'm going to give you one. So the certs are created. We don't need to download the cert. We just create it and close and go back here. So we generated the outbound cert. So now we click on something called download your Omni data. So what this is doing is in your downloads folder, it'll save a file called omnibundle.zip. Do not unzip this file. Oh, it's going to ask me what project I want. I only belong to one project. So GEC19, and I say download. So it's downloading a file called omnibundle.zip. What this file has is it's got my SSL certs. It's got information about my project. All the information needed to configure Omni. Okay? And so I have now have this file, omnibundle.zip, in my downloads folder. So then I can go to a terminal. Oops, I need a terminal. Just check to see there's some more there. There are a bunch there, yes. Check. So make sure you're getting the lab 1. Yep. Okay, so I can be in any folder. I just type the omni configure command. And what this... because I already had... Okay, yep. So... So what this has done, the Omni configure script, it looked for the file omnibundle.zip in your downloads folder, and it extracted from that zip file your SSL certs, and SSH keys already had one, but it overrode it, which is fine, it's the same key, and put all that information in a file. In my home directory, there's a folder called .gcf for GENI control framework or something like that. So, and it put in a Omni config. So if my slice had multiple users, so we talked about multiple users being part of a slice, all the Omni config file would have information about all those users, and I could log in as any of those users if I had their private key. So Omni is configured and ready to use. If you really want to test that it's configured, we could talk to any aggregate and say, tell me what resources you have, and you'll get this big long XML file. You don't have to do it, but you can if you want to. So I do omni dash, I have to tell which aggregate. So I'm just going to pick, doesn't matter, GPO, IG. This is the Insta-GENI rack at the GENI project office at BBN, and list resources. So omni is going to substitute IG GPO with the big long URL, and I got back this XML document that tells me about all the resources that are available at that rack. And we're not going to read this, but it's got things like there are ETH ProCurve switches I can use. There's these are the different types of delayed nodes, for example, different types of nodes available. Yeah, so LANs, VMs, things like that. Something only a tool would love and read, but you don't want to read it. So, has everybody configured Omni? Very good. So we are now we can jump to step 3. So to create our resource, request RSpec, we are going to use FLAC. So we're going to go back to our browser. I'm going to go to the portal. Actually, I'm going to go to slices, find my slice from before, and launch FLAC. So you probably already have a slice called lab0 with your initials. So let's launch FLAC. And this time, instead of drawing the topology by hand, we're going to import an RSpec file. So I already have a file which essentially has the same topology specified that we did earlier, just to save us a little bit of time. So once FLAC loads up, you can import. I'll show you how to load that RSpec file. Having RSpec files saved and reused is very handy. If you're, for example, teaching a class and want students to all use the same experimental setup, then you just share the RSpec file. They don't have to each draw their own topology. Or if you're collaborating with others on some research project, you can share RSpec files. There are other ways of sharing experiments. We'll talk about it later. So FLAC's loading up. So FLAC's talking to every aggregate, getting its advertisement, and populating its palette based on the advertisement. Any questions? So it's handy to, instead of typing long URLs, it's handy to cut and paste. So I'm going to open up the instructions that are online, so I can cut and paste commands from there. So I'm just going to go to you can open up a new tab on your browser or a different browser, doesn't matter. So if you go to the GENI wiki, and go to the GE's agenda, and go to this tutorial, which is getting started with GENI, the afternoon session. There is a link to the instructions. So when it comes to places like where I have to cut and paste URLs like this, I'm just going to cut and paste as opposed to. Another thing different about this afternoon's exercise is we are going to use what are called exogeni racks. So there are two types of racks in GENI. There are two teams building GENI racks. There's a team led by HP and University of Utah. That's their racks are called Insta-GENI racks. InstaGenie racks are essentially based on software from their old Emulab testbed, and they're not quite as, I mean, they're less expensive racks, but they don't have quite the compute power or the network, high bandwidth network cards that the other rack, the ExoGenie racks have. ExoGenie racks are built by IBM and RENCI, which is a research institute based out of North Carolina. So the hardware is IBM, the software is from RENCI. It's based on OpenStack and those technologies. So the ExoGenie racks, there are fewer of them. There are maybe 5 or 6 of them currently deployed, but they have 10 gigabit network cards as opposed to 1 gigabit network cards on InstaGenie. They have many, many more cores than the InstaGenie racks. Otherwise, they're both racks with switches. There are some differences in the way the software works. So we're going to use ExoGenie racks this afternoon for 2 reasons. One, just so you get a feel for what ExoGenie is like. And 2, I think there's another tutorial going on at this time which is using up a large number of InstaGenie resources. So for load balancing, we said we'll use ExoGenie. So in your instructions, where in some places the commands you type are a little different for ExoGenie and InstaGenie, you'll see this little ledge. If it says, if you see this icon, the command is for InstaGenie racks. If you see this icon, it's for ExoGenie. And we're going to use ExoGenie. Your worksheet will tell you a few things. It'll tell you which rack to use. If you look at step 3.2 in your worksheet, it says InstaGenie. That's a typo. It should have said ExoGenie. But the aggregate you're using is correct. So I think I have the ExoGenie rack at FIU from FIU, Florida International. I don't know what other racks are being used. Some might say RENCI or Clemson. No, Clemson is InstaGenie. So you should make sure you're using the right worksheet. Yep, this is worksheet. Yeah, make sure you're using the right worksheet, the one with the graphic on top of the worksheet. And so you got what rack? You have the rack at Florida. You have FIU also. So, but different ones of us have different racks we're going to use. So let me go see if FLAC is ready. Oh, it's ready. So as I said, this time we're going to import an RSpec that's already been created for you. So I'm going to import it from the web. So I click select import from the web and type the URL. In my case, I'm going to go cut and paste from here. And say OK. And it's going to ask me which aggregate manager do you want. Because the RSpecs do not, in your RSpec you can say I want resources from the specific aggregate, or you can create a generic RSpec that doesn't specify an aggregate. So I'll say OK, and it'll ask me to choose one. In my case, I want the one from Florida International, so I'm going to look for what's it called, exogenie.net.fmu. Here. So say accept. So there is my topology that popped up. Okay, so everybody at this point? Now do not hit the submit button because we're going to submit the RSpec ourselves. But before we do that, let's just take a quick look at the RSpec, see what it looks like. And then we're going to modify this RSpec. So to view the RSpec, look at this view button. And I say preview request document. And this says, I want a node. The name of the node is client. And in my case, it's coming from FIU. So there are different sizes of virtual machines you can ask for. Just like if you used Amazon, you have small, medium, large, extra large. So this is, I've asked a small because I don't need a lot of resources. And I want an IP address associated in a net mask. And similarly, another node. And the 2 nodes are connected by a link. And these are the endpoints of the link. So that's essentially this RSpec. But before we actually get this RSpec and do something with it, we are going to modify this RSpec to specify what are called install and execute scripts. So in the last exercise, we didn't quite do it, but one of the things you could have done is install, for example, iPerf and run some experiments, run iPerf. If you're running a large experiment, you don't want to be doing SSH into every node one by one and installing iPerf, for example, and then running things like that, configuring your nodes. So what GENI allows you to do is specify a script. It's called an install script. So when the node comes up, when a VM comes up, that script is automatically executed for you. So in that script, you can do things like install software, configure interfaces, whatever you want. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to tell our aggregate that when you bring up these VMs, please install, we're going to have it install a web server, we're going to have it install iPerf, and I think just those two, okay? So I already have a bash script written up that does this for you. So we can examine the bash script later, but trust me, that's what the script is doing. We can look at it later if we have time. And the script is also on a website. So I have the same script will run both on the server and the client, because in my script I say, if my host name is server, install iPerf and start iPerf as in server mode. If my host name is client, install iPerf and start off iPerf in client mode. So that's what my bash script does. So I'm going to go to the server and say, I would like to specify an install script. So I click on add install service, and I specify the URL for this install script. And that is listed on page 6 of your instructions. And pick the install script for GENI. So I'm going to my instructions, going to pick the install script for GENI, which is step here. Show GENI. So I'm going to pick it. I'm going to copy it and paste it here. And then so I'm telling install this in my /local directory. So when the node comes up, the aggregate manager is going to go to this URL, download this file, this in tar.gz format, unzip it, and install it in my /local. And now I want to tell it, I want you to do more than install. I want to actually execute the script. So I want you to execute a script called, I want to execute this as root. So you'll find this in /local. And it's a shell script, right? So I do that, and I apply. And I do the same thing on the client. Since I have execute in my clipboard, I'm just going to paste this first. And then I'm going to go add in the same install script from here, the GENI one. And I apply. So let's look at the RSpec. What happened to the request RSpec after I made these changes? So if I go look at the request RSpec now, it still has the same node client of type XO small, but now it added these lines for you in the RSpec. It says, run these services for me when the node comes up. It always does the installs first, regardless of how they show up here. So from this URL, download this script, unpack it, unzip it, and put it in /local and execute it. And the same thing you see for server. Okay? So everybody here with me so far? Should I give you a couple minutes to get caught up? Anybody not here at this step? Okay, I'll give you, how about I give you a couple minutes to put in the install and execute scripts. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yep. Right. So we're all using GENI today. So and yeah. So yeah. So yep. Doing okay? Yep. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Just delete it, and it's you can cut and paste. Oh, it froze on you? Yep. Oh, if you're not in part, if you were not in part one, were you here in the morning? Oh, you should be part of the GEC19 project. Just go to her projects tab. See what project she's part of. Yeah, projects. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she's in projects. And yeah, she's part of the GEC19 project. Omni bundle. Did she write? Did she pick the?
Oh, but I didn't have it broken down because it's already set up to do that.
So, yeah, Omni configure might have the wrong project,
Yeah.
so she needs to download her Omni bundle. Wait. But did she download the Omni bundle for the right project? You might want to. Why don't you delete her Omni bundle from her downloads folder? So delete DL. No, it's DL, I think.
Oh,
It's Windows. Maybe she should do it. Why don't
I was going to say, somebody who does Windows. See, I didn't know how to run it because she was already.
Okay. Yep. It could be the wrong project. Right.
But actually, you can give the dash R.
You could give the dash R. Sure. You can. Whichever is, yeah, you can do dash R. Being all right? Because your FLAC didn't have any of those things. Just launch FLAC again. I think you have a. Just close the FLAC button. No, the tab. Close the tab, and then go back to your port. Zero web. Okay. GEC19. Yeah. No, that's which is your one.
I think this one is the one I created using the license. The other two created using the web. I guess I'll try this one.
Okay.
I created.
Oh, you create a new slice. Okay, that's fine. Sure. Launch FLAC. So did your Omni configure? Did you use
Yes, I use
GEC19 project? Yeah, now it's fine. Now it's fine. FLAC is loading up now. No, it's not ready yet. When when this wheel stops spinning, then you can. Pardon? Oh, it's still waiting. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yes, I don't know if we should.
So I've been waiting for 10 minutes. Should I delete it and import it again?
Yeah, but you should usually. You're supposed to wait till it starts to read. Did you hit submit? No, you didn't. Oh, you did. Oh, no, okay, that's what's going on. I didn't. Okay, we were not going to hit submit. We're going to. Why don't you delete?
Oh,
Yeah, because we're going to submit this using Omni. Delete at use managers. Because we're going to use the Omni tool to actually create the resources.
okay.
We're just going to build the RSpec flag. This is a really common way of doing experiments at GENI where people might build their RSpec using FLAC because it's graphical. So you're typing in your XML and then export it like we're doing now. And then there's other tools such as Omni to actually run the experiments. So who has not yet gotten to specifying the install and execute scripts. Anybody not gotten there yet? So I can come and help you? No? Okay. All right. You back? You can get back on track. Okay. Oh, that's fine. I can happy to help you if it's. Okay. Or Rahina can. Okay. Yeah, if you need help, just Rahina's back there too, so she can help you. If, okay. All right. So, assuming everybody has the RSpec edited, so we have the install and execute scripts. What we're going to do now is in the view go back to the view RSpec, and then save this to a file. So we click on save to the file and save it on someplace where you can find it. I'm going to save it on my desktop, and you can call it anything. I'm going to call it lab1.rspec. So it's an XML file that went on my desktop, and there it is. And I can actually open it using it. Oops, not that one. Wrong one. I put the wrong one. That's for a different. There's the RSpec that I saved. So now we have the RSpec. Now I can use the Omni tool to reserve my resources. So we are, as I said, going to make the API calls ourselves. So I'm going to go to a terminal, and I'm going to type Omni, which is the tool I'm going to use. The name of the aggregate. The aggregate you should use is specified in your worksheet. So if you look at step 3.5 in your worksheet, that's the one-page thing. It'll tell you the nickname to use. In my case, it's FIU-EG, so the GENI rack at Florida International. And the create sliver. The name of your slice, in my case, it's lab0VTT, I think. And the name of the RSpec file. My desktop. So what I did was tell Omni to use this aggregate, FIUEG, to create a sliver. Oops, it's gone up there. And use this RSpec. I gave the path to my RSpec. And so Omni went off, submitted, made the next necessary XML RPC calls to send the RSpec to the aggregate. Okay? So you can do that. So all this means is the aggregate has my request. It doesn't mean my resources are ready to use. So to find out if they're ready to use, I can use the handy dandy ready to login script. I give it my slice name -a my aggregate name, and let's see, slice name. So what I'm asking Omni through ready to login is saying, check at this aggregate, FIU aggregate, EG, sorry. FIU EG, the GENI rack at FIU, check on my slice, which is called lab0VTT. So essentially, behind the scenes, it's making the call sliver status. And it could not find my slice. Did I spell my, what's my slice name? Lab0VTT. And am I using the right track? Oh, no, FIUEG, that's right. Okay, what's going on? Login information found. What's going on? I did my Omni configure. Anybody else having this trouble, or are you able to? Same problem? This is step 2 3. I'm sorry? Oh, really? Oh, okay. You're right. Maybe the resource was not ready. That's weird. Anyway. And you will see there are lots of people that belong to this project. So you will get a whole bunch of... oh, okay. I just removed my no keys. And it tells me how to SSH. I can SSH into, for example, the client node using this command. Or I can log into the server using either of these. They both work, this command. So, but are they ready to use? Yes. The status, both resources are ready because it says AM status ready, AM status ready. So both resources are ready, and these are the SSH commands I'd use to log in. So, working for everybody now? Yep, what does it say? Ah, import RSpec from URL. Okay, so it's probably that means you didn't. Okay. Okay, so select the whole thing. Yep. No. You got two HTTPs. That's why. See, that's why. There. Yep. Okay. There you go. Right. Now you can select your rack based on your worksheet. Choose a manager. So look at the worksheet you have. I don't know which one you're supposed to use. Okay. Any questions? Everybody? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Just type no keys, -- no keys. You won't get such a long output then. Yeah, okay. Just. Because it was not working and now it worked. Okay. Good. Good. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Actually, remove the no keys and see. I used this one and now it worked. Okay. Right. But if you remove it, it'll. Okay. That's fine. Yeah. It should work. It should work. I think the resource was not ready or something. Just, and then you'll only see a few lines of output to see what command you can use. If you just remove no keys, you'll only get a short output, and then you can. There, so you can use in any of these. Yep, yep. It's for especially for Windows, you don't want to know your keys because there's no SSH add, so you want to specify the keys. All right. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to give, I see a lot of people are behind, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to catch up. Yep. Right, the GENI one. Which part of the instructions are you in? Oh, oh, it is different. You're right. Sorry, that is a typo. But this, yeah, that's the one. You can essentially go to your web browser and put this URL. Yeah, copy and paste that. Probably is. Pardon? Oh, I'm good. Thanks. Thank you. You're going to spoil me, Rahina. No, that's okay. No, I'm good. Actually, walking for me is better than standing. Just keeps the circulation going.
You're using exogenes, so type the second one.
Still in trouble? And if you are caught up, you're welcome to just continue through the exercises. You don't have to go lockstep with me. For those who are caught up and are curious to see what the shell script looks like, the one we loaded, you can just type the URL for the tar file on your browser, download it, untar it, and see what's in there. It's a really simple shell script which installs things such as iPerf and a web browser. And if you're curious to see what FLAC thinks of the slice, you can always go back to FLAC and load your slice again. And you should see the FLAC canvas green because the resources are ready, and it should be populated with all your, the IP addresses and so on. So that's an interesting thing to do if you're caught up. Go to FLAC, see what your slice looks like. And I'm going to do it here. So in FLAC, I'm going to have it refresh. So let's see how to refresh. I'm just going to. So I'm just going to close FLAC. There's a way to refresh. I'm just going to go launch FLAC again from slices. Sorry. What am I doing? So I'm waiting for FLAC to log startup so I can see what my slice looks like in FLAC. So this time, after you're done with the experiment, please do not delete your resources. We're going to, after this, do some, I'm going to do some demos, and there'll be a little of hands-on part. It's really simple, no worksheets or instructions for that. We'll do it as we go along. But I'm going to show you how you can view your slice using different tools, such as the portal or FLAC. So for example, I'm launching FLAC now. But just little things that are useful to know when you run your own experiments, but nothing really involved. So as you can see, FLAC now I didn't submit my request through FLAC. I used Omni, but when I loaded up FLAC, it realized, these resources are not ready to use, and it was able to actually get my information about the resources. So what FLAC did when it came up was it queried every aggregate for to see if I have any resources there. And what the rack at FIU said, oh yes, this slice has resources here, and here are the resources. And so every aggregate knows about the resources you have at that aggregate. So any tool, whether it's FLAC or Omni or the portal, can query the aggregates to find out what resources you have. Of course, only you can do it for your resources because you need the slice credentials and things like that. So, I mean, I cannot look to see what resources you have. Actually, I can now because we're all part of the same project, and I have admin privileges on the project. But in general, when you run your own experiments, you have your own project, your own slices, so only members of your project can see what resources you might have. So I can click on, say, the server and do this. I can visit. I'm going to can it connect? That's weird. I ought to be able to let's do the reload, refresh. SSH directly from launch a web browser to connect to my SSH server. That's weird. Well, I am not sure why I am not able to all right, I'm not going to worry about it now. But in theory, if you click the visit button, it'll launch it'll open up a browser tab, connect you to the web server there. So I'm going to, is everybody more or less done with this exercise? Anybody not done? Okay. Anybody not done? No. Okay, good. So I'm going to switch back to my presentation, and we're going to talk about, as I said, how we can use different tools to get different views of our slices and resources. So going back to PowerPoint. So we did that. Okay. So in part 2, we saw some automation of experiments. We saw how you can give people an aspect to import, so they don't have to draw the entire topology themselves, especially if you have a complicated topology. We saw how you can augment your RSpec with install and execute scripts. So not only can they, if you give people the RSpec with the install and execute scripts, not only can they load a topology, they can automatically have it configured a certain way because of the install and execute scripts. In fact, in some cases, what you may want to do is have people have the slice created, have all the resources there, and set up the SSH keys so people can directly log into your resources. So they don't even have to use FLAC or Omni or anything like that to set up the resources. You already set it up for them. You just give them the SSH keys they need to log in. In fact, in some later tutorials at this GEC, we want to focus on, for example, the OpenFlow tutorial. We want to focus on OpenFlow rather than setting up slices and slivers. So we will create these slices ahead of time, put the resources in there ahead of time. When you show up to the class, if you have a QR code, we'll just scan it so we know what your username is and add you as a member to the slice. And then your keys will automatically get added and you can log in. So we're not spending time with creating slivers and adding resources. So one of the reasons we do that is by that time we hope you already understand how to create resources using FLAC or how to get resources using FLAC or Omni. We do this on your own. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a different presentation. So after you leave the GEC, you probably want to run your own experiments. So here are some things that are worth knowing. Is this the right presentation? I'm sorry, I'm just going to make sure I have the right one. Okay, yeah. So reproducible experiments. So sharing experiments. We talked about install scripts, one way to do it. There's also, sometimes it takes a lot of configuration to prepare to get your experiment running. You might need to install packages, and so it might take a lot of time, and then you don't want to do that every time you run your experiment. So one thing you can do in GENI is take a snapshot of your image, of your OS image, and essentially create your custom OS image. And if you were in FLAC, what you would do is go to FLAC and click on the I button, and there is a you can create your custom image by let me go. Why can't I find things today? So you can I don't have a user created image, but you can specify, you can create a custom image and specify the URL. So it's normally the reason I cannot do this here is this is an OpenVZ VM. You can create custom images, but if you use the Zen VM, you can, or a bare machine, you can create a custom image, save it, and the next time you come, instead of specifying, and you give it a name, let's say you call this Bob's VM, so Bob's image. Next time you come, in your drop down, you can find that image instead of Fedora or Ubuntu. You'll find your image. You can specify that and load that instead. So it'll come up already configured with all the things you did previously. Or you could do both. You can do a combination of custom image and install scripts. So these different ways of either sharing experiments, reproducing experiments. One of the questions that often comes up is, how do I connect resources from different aggregates? So today, in both exercises, you chose VMs from the same aggregate, and you connected them together. Can you do the same thing with resources from different aggregates? The answer is yes. There are many different ways of doing it, depending on what you want to do. And in fact, there's a tutorial that's going on right now and one later today. It's an advanced tutorial for people who've used GENI quite a bit on how to do it. But just quickly, this morning we talked about the control interfaces and the data interfaces, the control plane and data plane. You can connect resources either through the control plane or through the data plane. If you're going through the control plane, you can just do what we did this morning, just ping, they're already connected through the internet. You can do that. Or you can set up what's called a GRE tunnel. So the GRE tunnel is essentially, it's tunneling over layer 3. So it looks like you have a direct link between the two, when it's really you might be going over multiple IP switches and routers. So you can do that. Or if you want to connect the data plane, This something called GENI stitching, which essentially through the internet to backbone, through the regional, sets up a VLAN for you, connecting your two resources, all your resources you have that you specify. So it's actually talking to internet to and saying, I need a VLAN to go from, say, Utah to Clemson, and the internet to aggregate manager looks at all possible ways in which this can happen and configures the switches in the internet to make that happen. It's a fairly complicated process. There are lots of switches where the software has to go and set up VLANs. It takes time. It can take as much as 30 minutes to connect to aggregates. And it can be, and resources are limited. There are only a certain number of VLANs that a campus might make available to GENI. So if other people are using it, it might, and there's only one way out from that campus to Internet 2, it could fail. But that's one way to do it, and that's what is the focus of the tutorial that's happening right now and one later this afternoon. It's a new capability. It's still in beta, but a lot of people are using it. Shared VLANs. So there are VLANs that are set up in GENI that are already out there, and they're set up as shared VLANs, so they have well-known names. And if the VLANs happen to be going from the aggregates you care about, you can connect to your you can just attach yourself to the shared VLAN. Obviously, when you get a shared VLAN, you're competing with other traffic on that same VLAN. And then ExoGENI has its own stitching that can only connect ExoGENI racks. And so there are different ways of connecting resources across aggregates. We talked about the different racks. They are different in small ways. That's why your instructions had different commands to use for the different racks. And you just need to know they're different. Most people get comfortable with a certain kind of rack and just stick with that kind of rack. But there's no reason to limit yourself to your experiment to only one. It's just easier if your experiment is all based on ExoGENI or all based on InstaGENI. So when you design your experiment, things to think about. Do you really need bare machine hosts? People often think, oh, I really like a raw PC here, a raw PC there. But raw PCs or bare machines there are very few of them, and they're in great demand. So if at all possible, try to use a Zen VM or an OpenBZ VM. Zen VMs are pretty much like bare machines. You can do almost anything with them. What are my networking needs? Is it can I run my net experiment within a single rack? That's obviously the easiest, the fastest thing to do. If you think you need to go across racks, then you can look at the approaches we talked about, either GRE tunnels over the internet or stitching on the GENI data plane. What tools do you want to use? Do you want to use FLAC? Do you want to use Omni? Most people use a combination. They would create an RSpec and FLAC. Sometimes if you want, say, 100 nodes, you don't want to drag and drop 100 nodes in FLAC, so they might just create, for example, 2 nodes and then cut and paste and change the host name. So people often start with FLAC to get the basic RSpec and then modify the RSpec and use tools such as Omni. The advantage of tools such as Omni are, one, it's command line, and two, it's written in Python. You can easily script it and extend the tool. And what platform are you familiar with? So this is the ExoGENI, InstaGENI thing. If you have used the Utah Emulab system in the past, you might want to stick with the InstaGENI because it'll feel somewhat familiar. Otherwise, pick what works best for you. So we already talked about slice membership, project slice membership. If you want to see all the slices that you own, you can of course go to the portal, click on the slices tab. You can also go to a terminal and list the slices you own. So essentially what Omni is doing is checking with the portal to see what slices you have. So in this case, I only have one slice, and it is called, okay, does it say where? Yep, this is the slice. Slices are identified by URNs, but really the last part of it is what matters. I have a slice called Lab 0 VTT. I can list the members of the slice. I'll just cut and paste the commands from here. To list slice members. And you can do it yourself. You can just watch me. This is just things that are handy to know. Oops, I need to specify the slice name. Okay, up. Lab 0. So what's happening here is the portal is really the front end to something called a clearinghouse. A clearinghouse is essentially the registry in GENI that keeps track of users, projects, slices. So Omni in this case is talking to the clearinghouse and asking who are the members of the slice. And you'll see a whole bunch of people show up. Why did this happen? Because this slice belongs to the project GEC19. And the GEC19 project has, well, all of you as members, plus it's got a whole bunch of people from the GPO as members, people like me doing tutorials. So we all show up there, and then the people from the GENI project office we're all showing up as admins, because we might be able to help you debug your slices. And most of you, if I scroll up, I'm sure you'll find one of you there as a slice member rather than a slice admin. Let's see. Oh, this is my slice, so I won't find you there, obviously. But I could add one of you to my slice. How about, let's use the command. Let's use this here. Maybe later on. Later on, I'll add one of you to my slice and see that you indeed show up. Okay, yeah, let's just do that right now. I'm going to add Omni add member to slice. And then I need the as slice member, sorry, slice name and username. So this is actually a new capability that became available last week, where you can do things like this from either Omni or the portal. Slice name was lab0vtt. How about I add you to my slice? What's your what's your username? The way to find out is if you go to the portal and look on top. Yep. How about I add you to my slice? So is that what the portal says on top? Okay. Tell me if I'm spelling it right. ADITYA. UV. UP. Okay. So now it's going to add me. So it's now a member of my slice. I could list slice members, or I could go to the portal and go in the GENI portal to find Chrome. I'm going to go to the portal and go to my slices. Oops, I'm already there. And I'm going to select the slice and see if you get listed there. There you are, Aditya. Yep. So you're a member of my slice. And I could make you an admin. I can edit slice membership and make you an admin. I'm not going to do that since I don't know you well enough. But so there you go. So these are handy things to have when you're working with a group. Common problems you might run into when you run your own experiments. Flag did not. This slice did not come up. Flag canvas did not turn green. Could be you didn't wait long enough. Sometimes you have to be patient, but sometimes it's a problem with your RSpec. So the request was not well formed, so it failed. So the way to see what might have gone wrong is, if let's say the flag canvas never turned green, maybe we want to use another tool, such as the portal, to go check on the status of your slice. And so in my case, I'm going to go to the portal. I go to my slices, and I have one slice. I want to see if what the status of my resources are. So I can ask for resource status. Actually, I can do this. It'll just take a long time because it's going to check with every aggregate. But I can do something that's a little faster. That's where I select the slice. And then if I know my resources came from, in my case, Florida International. So I'm just going to get my status there and see what it says. I could have done a one get all, but my tool the portal will then go to every aggregate and say, what's the status of the slice? I don't have resources there, so it'll all come back as saying no resources. So it's slow. So here you go. So my resources at FIU are ready, and I can even ask for details. And did I click on the wrong place? It was FIU. FIU get status. Yeah, okay, there. Did I detail remove my resources? I have resources. So I can get the status of my resources. I'm wondering if I'm clicking on the wrong, sorry. I'm clicking on the wrong row. That's why. There. So it says I have resources there. Two of them are VMs. One of them is a link. And they are all ready. So for some reason, your flag canvas doesn't go green. You can go to the portal and check for status if your resource is there. So that's something that's, and if it still says not ready, then you want to check on whether it's your RSpec. And there's a tool called RSpec lint, which essentially parses your RSpec to make sure at least the syntax of the RSpec is correct. So we already talked about the get status. Another way of getting status is using the ready to login, which we did in our exercise. Or you could go to the portal, which I just did, and got the status of the resource. Another thing that we hear about is, oh, my resources disappeared. I had them yesterday, they're gone today. Well, it could be your slice expired. And if you, again, go to the portal, or even FLAC, they will tell you when your resource, so FLAC will tell you when your resources will expire. Where is it? So my resources here will expire in 6 days and 20 hours and 44 minutes. And if I want, I can extend my resource reservation by 3 days, 1 day. So different aggregates have different policies on how long they will let you extend your resource. So if you use Omni, you have the handy option of as long as possible. So extend my resources as long as possible. Okay. So that's the most common thing that when people say my resource disappeared, it's because they have they've expired. We talked about expiration. I'm not going to spend time there. Cannot log into a node. Some people ran into it this morning. It asked for a password. And often, well, you can't log in because the resource is not there. So you can't log in. Your username may be wrong. Use ready to log in. It'll tell you what your username should be. Could be that your private, somebody earlier today downloaded their public key instead of their private key, and they could not log in. So make sure you're using the right key. Make sure your key has the right privileges. SSH on Windows, on Unix machines and Macs is very picky on permissions on the private key. Make sure you have the right permissions, otherwise it won't use it. Okay, so those are common problems. And that's it for the exercise. So I would like you to do two things now. One is please delete resources. You can either use FLAC or type this command in Omni to delete your resources. And then how many of you are planning on attending the GEMINI tutorial tomorrow? It's the introduction, instrumentation and measurement using GEMINI. Do you know? Okay, if you're not, that's fine. The reason I ask is they want people to create the slices now, so you're not doing it in the class. And if you don't, that's fine. You can also create it during the class. But if you are, I was going to tell you to give you instructions on how to do that, but you don't Nobody here seems to be planning on doing that, so you're fine. Before I leave, before you go, if you have any questions, I hope by now you're kind of comfortable running an experiment at GENI. You can launch Flack, you can drag and drop resources, connect them, you can log in. So I hope by now you feel comfortable going off on your own, trying it out. I'm sure you'll have questions. Don't hesitate to email help@geni.net. This email, it only goes to a few people in the GENI project office. The people who, one of the people most likely to answer are the three of us, who's Sarah, Nikki, and I are part of the experimenter support group within the GENI project office. So we tend to answer questions. Another very useful resource. So this is a mailing list that goes only to people in the GENI project office, not the whole GENI community, but the archives of this list are public. So you don't want to put any very private information like your keys and things like that in this. We can, of course, delete it from the archive if you accidentally do it, but try not to. Another very useful list that you should be members of is GENI users at Google Groups. So if you go to Google Groups, look for GENI users. That's a community list. So it's people like you who are using GENI are members of this list. They often run into the same issues that you have run into and ask questions, so somebody might answer. But before you ask a question, Google Groups has a very nice search capability. So do the search. For example, you're having issues with logging in. Let's say in your search you might want to say, cannot SSH, and then it'll probably find 5 or 6 people who have emailed this question, I cannot SSH. Or you have some more advanced question on how configuring OpenFlow or something. Search for OpenFlow. It's really nice. Google it's got a really nice search capability. And when you post there, you have a lot more people than just Sarah, Nikki, or I answering questions. People who know a lot more about these networking technologies than we do. And if the GENI wiki, there are a bunch of how-to pages. It's got pages on how to create my own image, how to log into nodes. So that's also very useful. And then if you want to ask a question, please provide us as much information as you can. Give us your where you got your account. Did you get it from the GENI portal, or did you get it from Planet Lab or Emulab? What tool you used? Did you use Flack or Omni? What's the name of your slice? What aggregates are you using? The more information you can provide, the easier it is for us to answer. Because sometimes we get questions like, I can't log in. Help. It's like, all right, can't log into which resource, where, what are you using? Windows or, so please provide as much information as possible. And then if you go to the GENI wiki, there's lots of information. If you're an instructor, there's helpful advice on running a class. If you're a TA, that's useful. Sample exercises you can use. And mention the how-to pages. So lots of different how-tos organized by topic. And more ways to learn. At the start of every semester, we have trained the TA sessions over WebEx. Been very popular. It's been TAs and instructors joining us. It's over 2 Friday afternoons. So hands-on tutorials similar to this, plus information specific to running a class on GENI. And there's a summer camp that happens in June at Iowa State. If you do join the GENI announce mailing list, you'll see an announcement there. We give stipends to the people who attend. So it's a 4-day camp, about 20 or so people. If you're coming from a US university and you're selected, you get a stipend which covers travel and some expenses. And they're really good. People do team projects. So after the first day, people tend to form groups. Oh, I'm interested in cloud computing. I'm interested in software-defined networks. And they come up with a project based on their graduate work, graduate research. So it's been a lot of people have found it useful. And thank you very much. I hope you found this useful. Please do not leave without filling up a feedback form. I'll distribute feedback forms. Oh, I think you already have them. Yes, so please fill them up. You do have the option of filling it up online. There's a URL at the top. But in my experience is people never do it online because they say I will and never do it. So just do it on paper. And I'll be around for questions if you have any questions. All right, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.